Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you could just be patient for a moment while we load everybody from the waiting room. I hope everybody's doing well. We have a nice large audience today. Just a moment more, we'll load and we'll get started. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another colloquia. The Program on Education Policy and Governance is part of the Taubman Center here at the Kennedy School. We put these on every couple of weeks, and we're thrilled to have you participate and attend. We have the chat function open, but more importantly, we have the Q&A function open where you're able to write in your questions. You can do so at any time. And we have a formal Q&A session after the presentation. Following Mr. Carvalho, we will have our next colloquia on Thursday, October 29th. We are pleased to have with us that day Wayne Lewis, who is Dean of the Belmont University School of Education and former Commissioner of Education for the state of Kentucky. And after that, on November 12th, we will have Joseph Olszewski, who is the former Superintendent of the Seattle Public School System. If I could now turn it over to Professor Paul Peterson, who's the Henry Lee Shattuck Professor of Government here at the university and is the Director of the Program on Education Policy and Governance. Paul?
Thank you, Antonio. Antonio Wentland is our Associate Director. Well, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today Alberto Carvalho, who has served as the Superintendent of the Miami-Dade County Public Schools since September 2008. It's the nation's fourth largest school system. And during the tenure of Mr. Carvalho, it has become one of the nation's highest performing urban school systems. It was named by the College Board Advanced Placement Equity and Excellent. It was named by the College Board as the district who won the highest honors for advanced placement equity and excellence in 2014. And it won the Broad Prize in 2012 for high performance in urban education. And it's been performing at higher levels ever since. In a state which generally is performing very well, the state of Florida, Miami-Dade is outperforming its fellow urban areas by a substantial margin. So it's a great privilege to me, for me, to have Alberto Carvalho with us today. And he's going to be speaking about, can big city school systems be held accountable? There's a lot of concern about accountability in the age of COVID and what's going to happen as we go forward. But to understand the future, we have to understand how we got to where we are today. And there's no state that's better placed to talk about this than the folks from the state of Florida. And if you're going to talk about the state of Florida, there's no better place than to look at it from the vantage point of the district that's made such rapid improvements in recent years. So, Mr. Carvalho, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, particularly during this time of the year, to participate in these type of colloquia. And I think the time could not be better, considering the combination of anxiety and quite frankly, just sort of the tone and tenor of the nation as students return back to school, physical schooling, after a very lengthy distance learning process, which was successful in some places, miserable in others, and perhaps at best average in most places. The question now is, yes, what do we do about accountability? Now, I need to confess that I am an accountability-driven superintendent. Accountability is part of the motivation and the energy we use to catapult ahead of other districts. And we don't shy away from our superpower, which is data, interpretation of data and using data as a decision-making tool. But before I get too ahead of myself, let me give, for those of you who may not know much about Miami or Miami-Dade County Public Schools, a little bit more than just the beautiful backdrop that you can see behind me. That is Biscayne Bay, that is downtown Miami. Actually, you're looking at the financial district, our Wall Street in downtown Miami, which is right across the water from Port Miami, where for the better part of 7 months, we've had a $49 billion industry parked at the port, the cruise line industry. The economic ramifications stemming from that for our state, for our country, are dramatic. But let me hone in a little bit on who we are as a school system. How large are we, what the student composition is, and in a very, very quick and animated way, a perspective of what Miami-Dade County Public Schools stands for. So please stand by. I think we just lost a little something here. Could you hear sound?
Yes, we could hear sound.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Miami, home to the 4th largest school district in the United States, a multicultural, socioeconomically, and linguistically diverse community representing over 160 countries and 50 different languages. How did we do in 2020? Let's start with 0 F schools 4 years in a row. A-rated district with
Okay.
Miami, home to the 4th largest school district in the United States, a multicultural, socioeconomically, and linguistically diverse community representing over 160 countries and 50 different languages. How did we do in 2020? Let's start with 0 F schools 4 years in a row. A-rated district with 99% of schools rated at A, B, or C. Our graduation rate has hit an all-time high of over 89%. And the kids got over $465 million in scholarships. Speaking of big wins, we are home to 3 senior high state football champions. Number 1 in the state, home of the top national award for career academies. We lead the nation with 28 magnet schools awarded the standards of excellence in the U.S. and the most merit awards nationally 9 years in a row. So, how did we do? Miami led Florida once again with 133 schools on the U.S. News & World Report's best high school rankings. Including 4 high schools among the top 100 in the nation, we outperformed every large urban school district, with 4th grade students ranking number 1 in both reading and mathematics. Impressed yet? Let's not overlook. Modernizing our schools has reached an amazing 856 completed projects, surpassing a staggering $850 million in school improvements. Our energy rebate program has returned hundreds of thousands in energy savings. And speaking of money, our budget department was awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for the 34th year in a row. Did I mention it also earned the award for Best Practices in School Budgeting, the highest form of recognition in governmental budgeting? All of this happening with one focus: student achievement. 2020 was moving at lightning speed, proving that with a skilled workforce, surging achievement was inevitable. 2020 was on a roll. Then,
don't you know that we are stronger together? Stronger, yes we are. So much more when we're united together. One mind, one soul, one It's been raining, it's been storming, pouring on us way too long. And we're at that point of breaking, so we must keep holding on. We gotta be strong for each other, we must be there for each other. We gotta care if we wanna be free. We gotta raise up our voices, stand up and make the right choices so we can be what we know we can be. Don't you know that we are stronger together? Stronger, yes we are. So much more when we're united together. One mind, one soul, one heart. We're stronger, yeah, gotta be stronger. Oh yeah, say stronger, stronger. One mind, one soul, one.
So that was just a different way of telling the story of Miami that we have been going through for quite a bit now. And it is a story probably not unlike that one of many districts across the country, but we like to tell our story in a different way. And I think that today's topic regarding accountability is both timely, appropriate, and indispensable to all of us. As I said earlier, I am an accountability superintendent. I believe in its power. I believe that you cannot manage what you can't measure. And in this state that has a compelling set of standards, a compelling accountability system that is observed by 67 different districts, understanding it, navigating it, and quite frankly, in the process, outcompeting yourself to outperform others is important to us. So we have gone through, over the past 12 years, a process that has recognized accountability not as an enemy, not as a foe, not as a gatchu, but quite frankly, as an opportunity to build systems that lead towards our support of our singular goal, which is student achievement. And that's what we have spent the past 12 years doing. Now, I can spend a lot of time speaking about the elements that have led us to where we are today. And as Paul knows very well, Florida has boasted probably one of the strongest accountability systems that the country has seen for a number of reasons. Number one, its comprehensive adoption of standards, its continuous revision of standards, its measured but ample assessment, but also from a consumer's perspective, an accountability system that is easily understood by the consumers of public education, by parents, by students, by business groups themselves. And that's critically important. So the state scale of A through F, which some decry, some don't like, is an easy way to understand the basic performance of a school. And it has spirited over time, quite frankly, a level of competitiveness between districts and schools themselves within the same district, a level of competition between what we call traditional public schools and other publicly funded schools like charter schools, but even private schools that may be recipients of public dollars through scholarships or vouchers. So for us, accountability has been, as I often say, an indispensable element of a two-sided coin of success. On one hand, accountability. On the other hand, on the other side, ubiquitous, universal public school choice provided by Miami-Dade County Public Schools, where the level playing field is established and competition on the basis of the same marker is observed by all students, all teachers, all schools. So what I would like to transition now to very quickly is give a little bit of a historic perspective that maybe is known by most, but maybe not all. Certainly accountability has been a salient feature of public education in our country and state of Florida for decades, particularly in the era of No Child Left Behind and its successor, the Every Student Succeeds Act. Schools and school systems have been accountable to improving student achievement as measured by performance on standardized assessments most commonly, or other set of metrics. And in our district, we use, as well as the state, graduation rates, participation or performance in accelerated coursework like AP, but even suspensions, student behavior elements are also used, teacher absenteeism. These are used by states to assign schools some type of performance grade or rating, and that is the case in the state of Florida. The accountability is typically associated with consequences directly linked to performance. Positive results in awarding school recognition funds in Florida, for example. Negative performance results usually in prescribed turnaround strategies that may range from state mandated changes to school-based leadership or even faculty to the wholesale potential state takeover of the administration or of a school or a district, as has happened in the state of Florida. I can go back to 2008 through 2010 when I first became superintendent, and we inherited a disproportionately large number of failing schools, particularly failing high schools, and all at risk of being shut down or go through a complete makeover, perhaps with private sector management. And the strategies that we implemented, using the power of the accountability requirements behind us, using also school improvement grant dollars, and creating an education transformation office that devoted its time, its attention, and its treasure to the most fragile schools, we were able to pull every one of those schools from the danger zone. Now, state and federal accountability measures have also made schools accountable to the public. I believe perhaps more than ever before, consider the stigma associated with attending an F school versus an A school, and the flexibility that has been afforded to students zoned to failing schools to attend better performing schools through the multiple options that exist before them. That has, quite frankly, been a game changer. And it has made schools not only more accountable to the public, but it has empowered the public, parents and students alike, with the ability to make choices that in turn then provide additional energy that supports the improvement of schools whose performance is below average. Accountability has been embraced in our school system, honestly, given our commitment to the promotion of equity across our linguistically and socioeconomically diverse community. And I think the demographics of Miami sometimes surprise some people. The snapshot is simple. 72% of our students are eligible for a free and reduced lunch. 18% are English language learners, speaking over 50 different languages representing 160 countries. And approximately 12% of students have an exceptionality other than gifted. Now, a lot of folks would look at that snapshot of demography and say, no, this system cannot rise, cannot punch above its weight. But we are. Our embracing of the Florida accountability system has honestly enabled our district to rethink data and reimagine how we use it. ensuring those who are closest to the students have access to the information they need to make the best possible decisions for student learning. So we develop over time portals that provide timely reports, dashboards with graduation tools, dashboards for student connectivity, attendance, teacher attendance, behavior information, dashboards during the spring of 2020 for school closures and management of student performance during distance learning, during virtual learning, assessment platforms using Performance Matters, and then the data reporting capabilities and functionality expected from our own private sector vendors like iReady or Edgenuity. So we actually develop systems using the state's accountability requirements to hold private sector partners accountable for the results we are obtaining, taking into account the fidelity of implementation of their services, their software, or their curricular support materials. And then this is something that doesn't happen just at the main office. This is something that all central and region office levels use. Data is used to prioritize sort of the specific supports that are provided to individual students and schools to help realize this transformational set of outcomes for kids. We are a district that believes that not every single student or school should be funded exactly in the same way. Well, we use accountability data and accountability requirements from the state to legitimize the means by which we differentiate support on the basis of performance and differentiate resource allocation on the basis of performance. And of course, there's no better way to monitor this than through our Datacom process. Datacom is a Miami-made practice to troubleshoot key operational and human capital issues and immediately deploy the necessary resources. This brings the principals of the most fragile schools, about 100 schools, in direct contact with me and my cabinet, where data analysis utilizing baseline data, the previous year's accountability data from the state, and then periodic data, formative data that's obtained by school, which is analyzed and reacted to in rapid form, meaning declare the problem, identify the problem, discuss strategy, and if you're doing a good job, the system at the cabinet level provides rapid solutions and investment. So these are strategic HR, personnel related decisions, the swapping of teachers, transferring of teachers, mandated professional development to teachers, but also the identification for the recruit, retain, and reward initiative for our most fragile schools, which allows teachers who are recruited and retained to be rewarded with handsome financial compensation in those schools. Without accountability, without data, you cannot build and maintain those systems. So our use of data is not as something that's punitive or an I got you, but more as a means of identifying gaps and problem solving that has played a significant role in student outcomes. Now, we've been able to achieve significant outcomes as a system, as Paul said, over the past decade, but the last few years have really intensified performance at the highest levels. You would expect a district like ours to maybe improve, plateau, and then fall into the sunset. That has not happened in Miami-Dade. And I'll clarify a little bit. Looking strictly at state assessment data, looking at the percent of students scoring a 3 or higher on all Florida standard assessments. Let me just break this to you. Since 2015 through 2019, looking at English language arts and mathematics, you obtain obviously a score for each. Over that period of 5 years, you obtained 20 different elements, one for Miami-Dade, one for Florida. So 5 data elements for English language arts, 5 data elements for mathematics in Miami-Dade, and the same for the state. Would you be surprised if I told you, even though Miami-Dade's demography does not resemble the rest of the state, we are much more diverse, with a higher percentage of English language learners, and certainly poor. Miami-Dade beat the state in ELA and math in 8 of the 10 data points over 5 years. And that's, as I said, with higher percentage of students you know, speaking a language other than English, with 50% of our students being foreign born. These higher percentages of our students meeting the achievement standards in English and math than their counterparts statewide has actually intensified over the past 3 years, from 2017 to 2019. It doesn't stop there. We are proud of the fact that in terms of advanced placement performance, because I believe that you have to raise the floor, but also expand the ceiling of opportunity for high-performing students. In terms of AP performance, we've seen a dramatic improvement. The percentage of MDCPS students scoring a 3, 4, or 5 increased from 40% in 2008 to 57% in 2019. It was 65%, by the way, in 2020, but keep in mind that the administration was significantly modified due to COVID-19 conditions. We've also seen significant improvements across different subgroups in that time period. Looking at another marker, graduation rates increased by over 20% from 62% in 2009 to 89.2% in 2019. We've also seen significant improvements across different subgroups, for we disaggregate all data, particularly our students with disabilities, a 17% increase since 2015, a 13% increase for English language learners since 2015, and a 9.6% increase for the economically disadvantaged since the same time period. Now, Paul and others know me to be somewhat competitive, not only across the state, but across the country. So yes, we do participate aggressively in NAEP and TUDA, for I do believe, as a member of the National Governing Board of NAEP, that NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, is the gold standard. Lacking Common Core or an assessment that would be taken by all students across all 50 states, we are impaired in our ability to comparatively assess states' performance across the board compared to other states. NAEP does that. So what does that mean for a district like Miami-Dade? Well, in 2019, our fourth graders' performance in NAEP was ranked #1 in both reading and mathematics among all participating TUDA districts. By the way, this is a systematic progressive increase over time. Miami-Dade's 8th graders, and only 4th and 8th graders are tested. Miami-Dade's 8th graders' NAEP scores ranked #2 in reading and #6 in mathematics on that same year, 2009, up from rankings of 5th and 10th in 2017. What's truly stunning is that Hispanic students in MDCPS achieved higher reading and mathematics scores in all grade levels tested than the national public, as well as the large city samples in the last 3 years. National public, folks, means all districts, all students, not just the large cities, which are accounted for by TUDA. Black students in Miami-Dade County Public Schools achieved higher 4th grade reading and mathematics scores and 8th grade reading scores than the national public and large city samples in 2019. So I say this because without accountability, local, state, or loosely stated federal accountability, I don't know how our students are performing. I do not know how our teachers are teaching. I cannot identify gaps that separate those who are performing well from those who are not. I cannot develop strategies that differentiate funding and staffing support if I do not have data. That's why, again, I keep saying that data is our superpower. Let's go now back to Florida. As we know, Florida has a robust accountability system, but its interpretation from a client's perspective, from an observer, is rather simple, rather easy to understand, for it's based on an A through F designation. And again, Miami-Dade County Public Schools, 2008, 2009, had dozens of F and D rated schools. Miami-Dade County Public Schools currently is the only urban district in the state of Florida that can say that for the past 3 years, it is an A-rated district, and better yet, 0 F-rated schools for the past 4 years. Over the past 20 years, we have decreased the number of F schools from 30 to 0. 99% of our schools are rated A, B, or C. And just in terms of comparison to the rest of the state again, this last year, 47% of our schools received A ratings compared to 36% of A rating statewide. Considering the demographic difference that separates the state average from Miami-Dade, these are compelling points of data. Now, we were moving well. We were actually sprinting. And then January, February, March brought COVID-19 to our nation. I remember putting COVID-19 as a point of discussion on the board of my cabinet room and discussing the level of preparation for a worst case scenario where all of our schools would shut down and we would pivot education to a virtual environment for an unforeseeable future. So given the focus on educational accountability over the past several decades, I believe, even considering what we've gone through since March, and by the way, we just this week reopened schools physically while parents have a choice to keep their kids online versus bringing them back to school. And the choice is, falls along the 50-50% line. But given the focus on educational accountability in our state and country, I believe it's truly unlikely that state and federal agencies would completely do away with all accountability measures during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some may even argue that there is a greater need for at least selective accountability right now to ensure that all students are learning, that those kids who regress the most, those kids who were in crisis before the COVID crisis began, who have now had disrupted learning during the last quarter of last school year, coupled with a summer recession, which hits them every year, coupled now on top with still distance learning for the first semester of this year, the first quarter of this year, there are some students whose achievement gaps will have grown. We know who they are. Students with disabilities, those on free and reduced lunch program, English learners, those gaps have increased. So school systems across the country, education advocacy groups and education think tanks and policy groups are all predicting what we know, significant academic regression amongst those groups that have gained the most ground in recent years. So our position has been one that is very simple. We need to have a measured, rational accountability system that provides usable, useful information to understand where those students are and so that we can really drive them towards their full potential. The challenges ahead lie in many of the same out-of-school factors that we all know, either directly or indirectly, that impact student learning achievement. Things like poverty, like parent education levels, things that perhaps in a more traditional schooling environment or scenario, schools may feel more equipped to help and mitigate. And even then, not 100% through tutoring or after-school programming or other potential intervention. All of that has become nearly impossible for schools to mitigate in an adequate way virtually, and even in an effective or sustainable way, as they would be in a brick and mortar setting. So administering assessments will certainly help schools and systems gauge where student performance is. This can provide a data set to help guide decision-making as it relates to placement, appropriate placement of students. However, assessments administered during COVID-19, in my opinion, should not be the only data elements used for these purposes. While imperfect, schools and systems should look at performance across multiple indicators to make such placement decisions. For example, data from prior years, local formative assessments like the ones we use, iReady, with a high degree of reliability and validity. And I also believe that greater flexibility on the ramifications associated with student assessment performance should also be provided during the pandemic. For example, decisions on third grade promotion or retention, necessary assessments required for graduation, such as in Florida, completion of Algebra 1 and the 10th grade English language arts assessment. In terms of performance and state accountability criteria, such as school and district performance grades? Well, schools and districts should be, in my opinion, afforded some degree of flexibility. And the reason for that is there's a great deal of variability within states in terms of the student learning experience in 2021 during the shutdown, making the process of assigning school grades and comparing performance across the state very complex. For example, the South Florida community was the epicenter of coronavirus, not only here in the state of Florida, but across the country. So our students have spent considerably less time in brick and mortar environments than students in the rest of the state. So from the perspective of equity and access, there is a problem that needs to be recognized. So at this point, we are making recommendations. Yes, let's move forward with Florida's accountability system. Let us assess our students. Let's use student performance data to help gauge how schools and systems are performing, to help direct resources where they are needed most. But let's also look at the negative consequences associated with state accountability and perhaps modify temporarily some of those. For example, and Florida has done this in the past with my recommendation, during a year where the state was severely disrupted by hurricanes, we advocated for the implementation of a no more than one letter grade drop in the assignment of school performance grades for that year. The same could be considered for this year. States can also consider modifying provisions to help reduce barriers to data collection and assessment administration that have been further complicated by COVID-19. Maybe some additional flexibility on how the assessments are done, on computer-based or pencil and paper. So we are truly traveling unprecedented times, uncharted waters, and exactly where we will land as a state, as a country, in terms of accountability, will be determined in certain part by politics, and that is a sad statement. Larger part, I think, by the outcome of November's elections, but also, I believe, from the ground level, from people like me, who believe, regardless of politics, reasonable, measured accountability that provides an insight into the level of learning of students, the capacity of teaching of teachers, and then the necessary differentiated resource allocation to students and schools on a basis of data. On the basis of that alone, we cannot in any way, shape, or form abandon the positive impact that true, respectful, and reasonable, rational accountability has on districts like Miami-Dade. So that is it. I stand ready to entertain your questions or comments.
Thank you very much. We're really excited to hear about all those accomplishments. But let me start the questioning by asking, what's the secret sauce? I know one piece of it. You've got to have a leader who stays in place for 12 years. I mean, that's really fundamental. The churning of school superintendents in our big city school systems every 3 years or less is really one of the causes of the ineffectiveness of so many systems. And I know that if you have the consistency that you get with a strong leader over a long period of time is extremely important. But then there's got to be other elements too. What did you do to really, move the system forward? What are some of the tools that you made use of besides accountability, or how did you apply accountability in practice?
So I think there are five key elements that I believe have played a pivotal role in Miami-Dade's evolution in terms of performance. The first one is a great leadership, and you touched on it. But I would not stop at the superintendency. Yes, 12 years is a great ride. It's about 4 times on the best case scenario of the average of a large urban superintendent. But the 12 years allowed me time to really build a good team of data-driven, courageous educational leaders. And where we've had the greatest impact, certainly I have a terrific cabinet, stellar senior leadership. Any one of them could be superintendents anywhere in the country. But the captains of our industry are school principals. We have decentralized teacher hiring, meaning, teachers are screened by central office, but then interview with the principal, because I hold the principal accountable. So they ought to hire the teachers that they feel they need at the local level. And I have to tell you that one of the very first things we did long ago was de-unionize, basically revoke union rights from school leaders. If you are a principal, an assistant principal, you are an at-will leader. You are accountable to me. And that was a game changer. In exchange, as I said, we've given them, alongside higher performance, greater autonomy. With decreased performance, greater level of intervention. So let me put a metric to that. By now, over 88% of the principals who are running our 400 plus schools are not the leaders that were in place then. I remember firing 9 principals within 2 weeks of being superintendent, and almost got fired myself. But I survived it, and I quickly realized that we needed a lot more work to do. And I can tell you that leadership matters. The second thing is teacher effectiveness. We've been able to negotiate with the teachers union progressive contracts that have discarded the traditional steps. There are no steps in Miami with automatic salary increases on a basis of step. We used race to the top money to buy a policy concession to bring about performance pay tied to, negotiated and tied to students' results. We have been able to negotiate common planning period in schools, which is critical for the narrative and dialogue, professional dialogue between teachers. So I believe that teacher effectiveness is the second most important point. The third one is choice. You've heard me talk about this. 73.4% of students in Miami-Dade County Public Schools are in programs not attached to their neighborhood school. They can go wherever they want. There are 1,000 different choices in addition to 120 charter schools. That includes magnet programs, single gender schools, you name it. The next element is, and there are 2 more, is bridging the digital divide. Beginning in 2012, when we passed a $1.2 billion bond referendum to invest $250 million in 1 year in technology and the rest in renovation and building of schools, it was a game changer for us. This one-to-one device, hotspots for students who need them, digital content, amplification of bandwidth, really transformed Miami-Dade County Public Schools. All of a sudden, a child is not limited as far as his or her learning to the bell-to-bell instruction. By having a device at home, by taking the device home, they can have 24/7, anytime, anywhere learning, as can their parents, because we invest in developing a parent academy through the portal that the student uses. And then lastly is smart parental engagement. Forget about spaghetti dinners. It's about really improving the skill set of parents to create an echo of learning at home. So teach the parent how to navigate the school system, how to leverage their demand to produce better results for those students. Those 5 elements have led to the results that we currently have. And then, the last one, by the way, is having the courage and the honesty to recognize when you screw up and recalibrate very quickly and move on.
So, Mr. Carvalho, we have a question here from Daniel Walker. Do you want to ask the question, Daniel?
Certainly. Hi, this is Daniel Walker, Executive Director of Delaware Ken here in the state of Delaware. We were just having a conversation this morning about moving to a more equitable student-based funding system, something we've been talking about for 2 years since my organization got involved. One of the things we were sort of trying to determine is can we link accountability and school funding reform? I thought your comment on using data and accountability to drive funding decisions was enlightening. So I was curious to know how if at all, you possibly not the case given your context, but how, if at all, did you move policymakers along in deciding what accountability metrics or measures we utilize to drive funding decisions?
So very, very good question, Daniel. And that's exactly what we've done. We brought to the board progressively a number of recommendations that identified specific accountability elements, so specific metrics that we believe were most critical in determining the health or fragility of a school, and obviously its students. And we began to use those to form a number of processes for the funding of schools driven by student performance. And not, by the way, not only student academic performance, also number of critical incidents in school that would lead to the assignment of additional personnel like counselors, school psychologists, mental health specialists, or even police officers, school resource officers. But we used elements of the state's accountability system, in addition to some formative data from the district, to generate an index that drives funding for schools on the basis of primarily academic performance, looking specifically at reading, mathematics, and then looking at attendance and looking at behavioral indicators. Those four elements are crunched into a formula that produces a numerical value that becomes a multiplier to the typical per pupil funding in Miami-Dade. And so when I talk about the fact that we differentiate instruction on the basis of performance, much like a great elementary school teacher would differentiate instruction via different stations in a classroom, we as a school system differentiate instruction and support and funding. And that translates into greater number of professionals in certain schools than others, different ratios of teacher and student. It means before and after school programming. It means additional resources for a winter session for students who are identified, but also a spring session for students who are identified, a longer school day, and perhaps even a summer sessions, as we had even during the pandemic, that specifically target students who need more, but not more of the same thing. And we achieve all of that, not by asking for more money, but quite frankly, looking at the money we have and forcing a different distribution, a differentiated distribution driven by the characteristics of performance in these schools. Now, on the other end, we also reward the schools that make improvement. You cannot just simply feed, provide inputs to those that are struggling. You need to, it's not an either or, it needs to be a both and financial investment, and we do both. But it is possible. Sometimes the biggest hurdle is the policy structure that believes, that cannot tell the difference between equity and equality, and therefore provides equal funding to every single student, when in fact, they're facing very disparate conditions.
So let me ask you how you couldn't speak to us today when the schools just opened this week. I think that's right. Isn't this the first week schools opened in Dade County?
So we opened our school year August 31st, but it was all virtual. We were in phase 1 up until just a couple weeks ago. We now transitioned to phase 2, and then very quickly the state went into phase 3. The board had passed a resolution to actually start schools a little later than I was pushing for. I was pushing for a September 30th through October 5th staggered return for about 50% of our students, with all the mitigations and PPEs and social distancing and all that. But the board, I would say, under some degree of pressure from the citizenry and unions, pushed it back for a later date, starting no earlier than October 14th through the 21st. But then we were notified by the Commissioner of Education that the original plan should stand. So We went back to an October 5th start. And I tell you, we started with pre-K, K first grade, and students on the modified curriculum. These are the most disabled children. We wanted the most fragile and youngest to come back first. We had 2 days in that environment. And then yesterday was our biggest wave. We brought back 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 9th, and 10th. Yeah, that was a massive wave. That was a tsunami coming at us. And it was pretty flawless. And now we are in a second day of that second wave. And now Friday, tomorrow, we will bring the remaining students. But as of today, every one of our schools is open with students in them. Tomorrow we'll bring back the 7th, 8th, 11th, and 12th grade students. And that will be about 180,000 students will be in attendance at our schools. The remaining, the other 50%, will continue through My School Online. Yes, so this has been the second reopening and been exciting for us.
Well, yeah, you're doing in 1 week what a lot of schools are doing over the course of 1 or 2 months. So congratulations on moving all through from beginning to end there in the course of a week. But there's another question here. Iris Stoll?
Yeah, hi. Of those 50% of students who are not back in physical school, I guess because they've chosen not to, or their parents chose not to, how many of them are engaging daily with remote learning? Have any of them just disappeared? And have you seen an increase in families choosing to homeschool rather than take up the remote learning offerings from the schools that they had been attending before the pandemic?
Sure, Iris, so good set of questions. We have seen a number of things, a number of trends. Number one, yes, the number of parents opting to homeschooling has increased, both from the public sector as well as the private sector. In the state of Florida, the superintendent is the only individual who will authorize homeschooling for any child in my jurisdiction, whether they are public school students or private school students. And I've seen a moderate increase in the number of parents wanting to homeschool their children. I can tell you, and I think this was part of the video, we achieved in the last quarter of last year and this year, again, a very, very high connection rate. So 99% of the students are connected. And that's because of our ability to, we've by now put 125,000 devices. And for those who have no access to internet, hotspots to students to guarantee connection. So we do not have a connection issue with students. We do not have a problem of connectivity to students, but there is no doubt an engagement gap, because the level of engagement during distance learning, during remote teaching, and ours, by the way, is negotiated. It is active synchronous teaching, meaning a teacher is actually engaging with the students. But if you do not have the right model of parental support that ensures that the child is on task, that the child is paying attention, because after the synchronous teaching portion, that is an asynchronous independent element. And there are some students for all kinds of reasons who will not maintain the same level of engagement. So I think that's where we become, that's where there is a disconnect that will further the regression that some students are facing. I can also tell you that even though it's about 50-50, 50% online, 50% have decided to come back to schools, and we knew that based on survey back in July. We are now seeing, now that students are returning, changes both ways. So parent circumstances are changing. So some who had chosen My School Online are being reactivated to their jobs and are asking us to take the kids into school. It's causing some issues regarding master schedules if we want to maintain a 75% threshold so that there's an opportunity for social distancing. But there are some changes happening as we speak. So I am concerned about some students who regressed to begin with and maintained the online status, not because they're not connected, but because I believe that their level of engagement is lagging, and that will manifest itself in terms of their own performance.
So how well can you track students in this situation? You know, Miami-Dade is a data-driven system, as you've said. So surely the data quality cannot be as good right now as it's been in the past. You can't keep track of what's going on there with the same degree of precision that has been standard in your operation for the last number of years. So what is it that's, you know, how do you manage to maintain the systems of supervision that have proven so successful in the past?
You're right, Paul, not easy, but we've actually have been quite successful with our diagnostic assessments. We've been very successful with iReady assessments that provide us plenty of information that we use. But it's not the same. I can tell you that it is a struggle for the students who are doing it online versus those who are in a brick and mortar environment. But the systems, the tools that we are using are still the same. The delivery has always been, you know, through a computer device. They're now just doing it from home rather than necessarily all of them doing it at school. We saw and we commissioned iReady, Curriculum and Associates, to actually measure the level of engagement that students were having with iReady by socioeconomic status, and then compare that level of engagement in Miami-Dade to the level of engagement for those subgroups across the country. And it was very interesting. The first few days of interaction with iReady, poor students disengaged more. And that was consistent across the board in Miami-Dade and across the country. But then something changed. In Miami-Dade, the next few days, they returned to a level that preceded COVID. The rest of the country never regained it. And I cannot explain that. So that builds confidence in our systems that whether we are you know, looking at kids in a virtual modality or physical modality, they are probably more engaged than students in other districts, but there's still a difference. And that builds my confidence that not perfect, but we will get pretty good data that will at the very least inform, sort of give us a temperature check on performance across the board.
Well, it's 1 o'clock, and that's the witching hour for the PEPG seminar. But we are all grateful to you, Superintendent Carvalho, for a fascinating account of how Miami-Dade has made use of accountability to really enhance its system and to learn about the challenges that you're facing at this very moment. So thank you for taking time out of your day and your week to share these insights with us.
Thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.